The dark secret buried in 800,000 years of evolution. In 1994, deep in the Sierra de Atapuerca mountains in Spain, archaeologists unearthed something that would forever change our understanding of who we truly are. These weren't just 800,000-year-old human bones. They were fractured bones, burned bones, bearing the same surgical marks as a butcher's shop. For centuries, science swept this truth under the rug. It called it an isolated accident, desperation from famine, an exception to the rule. But there, at that level called TD6, while the 800,000-year-old dust was carefully removed, the evidence was too brutal, too methodical, too systematic to be ignored. We weren't looking at the remains of an isolated tragedy. We were looking at a pattern that would repeat itself at dozens of archaeological sites around the world. A pattern that would reveal something profoundly disturbing about our own nature. Today, you'll discover why our ancestors not only killed their fellow humans, but turned them into elaborate meals, and what this dark side reveals about the beast that still lives within us. Archaeology has always had a problem with cannibalism, not for lack of evidence, but because admitting that our ancestors were systematic cannibals would destroy the comfortable narrative of a civilized evolution. Whenever marked bones appeared, the explanation was standard: extreme hunger, isolated ritual, accident, until Gran Dolina. We're at level TD6, hundreds of bone fragments from a previously unknown species, Homo antecessor. But as they clear the earth, the team freezes. The marks weren't from hyenas. They weren't from big cats. They were precise, deep, parallel incisions, made with stone tools by human hands. The protocol was identical to that of a modern butcher shop. Disarticulation marks showed where tendons had been cut to separate limbs. Fleshing marks indicated the systematic removal of muscle tissue. Percussion fractures revealed that long bones had been broken specifically to expose the marrow, one of the most valuable sources of fat in prehistory. There were even signs of cooking. The bones had been placed over a fire. What the scientists had in their hands was not the record of a funeral ritual or a crime of passion, but the remains of a meal. And here is the most shocking revelation. The victims were children, teenagers, and young adults. Their bones were mixed with the common garbage of the cave, discarded along with carcasses of horses, deer, and rhinoceroses, processed in exactly the same way. In Gran Dolina, Homo antecessor was not just surviving. It was integrating its kind into its diet. In an organized way, systematic, efficient. If Gran Dolina were an isolated case, we could breathe a sigh of relief. But it wasn't. In Krapina, Croatia, Neanderthal bones from 130,000 years ago showed patterns identical to those of animals slaughtered for consumption. They were cranial fragments and fractured long bones with cut marks indicating the precise removal of muscles and brains. And here's the disturbing detail. There were no signs of food scarcity in the region at that time. Animals were abundant. Famine couldn't explain it. In France, at Fontbrégoua, human bones were processed in the same way as deer bones, side by side without distinction. Later, in Gough's cave in the United Kingdom, dating back 14,700 years, remains of Homo sapiens were found with evidence of defleshing and fractures for marrow extraction. But with a detail that transcends mere nutrition, skulls transformed into skull cups, cups for drinking. This is not subsistence. It is a display of power. It is saying, I drank from the skull of my enemy. And in the New World, the evidence becomes even more visceral. In 1967, in Mancos Canyon, Colorado, archaeologists unearthed the remains of at least 29 Anasazi individuals. Each skull had been crushed, long bones fractured to extract marrow. Evidence of cooking. The bones were processed with the same efficiency as the animal remains found at the same site. Then came the definitive molecular proof, the evidence that leaves no room for debate. The Anasazi left behind coprolites, fossilized feces, which contained human myoglobin. This protein is found only in human muscle tissue. Its presence in digestive residues is irrefutable biological evidence that human flesh was, in fact, consumed and digested. How do archaeologists distinguish a sacred ritual from a simple prehistoric butchery? The answer lies not in the bone itself, but in the silent language of the marks left on it. Each incision is a signature. While carnivore teeth leave irregular crushing marks, stone tools produce straight, parallel grooves in surgical locations, but the most visceral evidence is the percussion fracture. When you find long bones broken in a spiral, you're not seeing an accident. You're seeing the deliberate search for marrow. And what makes all this even more disturbing is the absence of animal bite marks beneath these incisions. This rules out the idea that our ancestors were merely cleaning up the aftermath of an attack. They were first in line. They wielded the blade. If it wasn't just hunger, then what was it? Science has identified 5 motivations, each more disturbing than the last. First, strategic nutritional cannibalism. The human body is seen as a complete package of proteins and fats. In extreme conditions, our ancestors did the cold math. 1 human body was worth as much as 3 deer. Secondly, there was cannibalism as an instrument of domination and psychological terrorism. Consuming the enemy was not just eliminating them, it was annihilating their existence. Some groups believed they absorbed the strength of their adversary by consuming them. Others used cannibalism as a brutal message. Cross our territory, and you will not only die, you will become dinner. Imagine the psychological terror of living knowing that the neighboring group would not only kill you, but consume you. Third, ritualistic cannibalism as a form of mourning. In some ancient cultures, consuming loved ones was the ultimate form of respect and love. Instead of letting the body rot in the earth or be devoured by wild animals, they integrated the essence of the deceased into their own body. It was a way of saying, "You will live forever within me." To us, this seems horrific, but for them, it was the most sacred act possible. Fourth, punitive cannibalism. Did he break a tribal law? Did he betray the group? His punishment would not only be death, but total annihilation. His body would be consumed, his bones discarded like common garbage. Nothing would remain, not even memory, not even a grave. It was the ultimate way to erase someone from history. And fifth, the skull cups. In Gough's cave, human skulls were meticulously transformed into functional cups. The markings show they were carefully cleaned, shaped, and polished. This is not subsistence. This is a pure display of power. It is literally drinking from the skull of the defeated enemy. And here is the most disturbing truth. Cannibalism is not exclusive to humans. Bull sharks practice intrauterine cannibalism, where the strongest embryos devour their siblings even before birth. Praying mantises and black widows are notorious for sexual cannibalism. Male lions, upon taking over a new pride, frequently kill and sometimes eat the cubs of the previous male. What we see in Gran Dolina is not an anomaly of our species, but the human manifestation of an impulse that nature has never entirely discarded. But cannibalism didn't happen in a vacuum. It was a powerful force that shaped the social machinery of early human communities. Imagine the constant state of alert in which these people lived. Living, knowing you could be seen as their next dinner, forced the development of far more sophisticated defense mechanisms. This practice had an unexpected side effect, the extreme strengthening of internal group bonds. To survive in a world where the neighbor was a potential predator, groups needed absolutely unbreakable tribal cohesion. The systematic demonization of the outsider became the basis of collective identity. The primal sense of us versus them was literally forged in blood. Within the group itself, internal cannibalism ruthlessly dictated status and social hierarchy. Who had the right to consume? Who was consumed? Who decided when and how? These questions created the first power divisions we know. So, if cannibalism was such a widespread practice, when exactly was the switch flipped? Science shows that there wasn't a single event, but a gradual decline driven by a radical change in human lifestyle. The great turning point was the advent of organized agriculture and the permanent sedentarization of populations. With more stable, predictable, and abundant food sources, the nutritional pressure that previously made the human body a valuable strategic resource simply disappeared. There was no longer a need to look to one's neighbor as a potential source of calories. As populations grew and formed larger, more complex societies, survival came to depend on new social structures and much more rigid rules of coexistence. The emergence of more elaborate belief systems, organized religions, and increasingly complex funerary rituals played a crucial role in this shift in mentality. The emphasis became the sacred integrity of the body and respect for the dead. What was once ritually acceptable came to be seen as an absolute taboo. So here we are, direct descendants of cannibals. But this is not a story of moral condemnation. It is a story of profound understanding. Because the same species that meticulously fractured long bones to suck out marrow now builds gigantic hospitals dedicated to saving the lives of complete strangers. The same species that turned human skulls into goblets now passionately debates universal human rights. Prehistoric cannibalism is not a dirty secret we should hide in shame. It is a vivid reminder of the extraordinary resilience of the human species, the profound complexity of our motivations, and the long journey that has brought us to modern civilization. The cut marks on the bones of Gran Dolina, the skull cups of Gough, the coprolites with human myoglobin from the Anasazi, are not merely archaeological curiosities. They are essential chapters in human history. They are physical proof that evolution is not a straight line toward moral perfection, but a chaotic, brutal, and wonderfully adaptive process. And perhaps the most important lesson, the layer separating civilization from barbarism is surprisingly thin. The same impulses that led our ancestors to practices we now consider heinous still exist, dormant in the human psyche. Therefore, knowing the monster we once were is not just an academic exercise, it is a necessity for collective self-knowledge. So, the next time you look around and see the complexity of modern civilization, remember, all of this was built on foundations of broken bones and skulls turned into goblets. And this doesn't diminish us, it ennobles us, because it shows that we are capable of profound change, of radical moral evolution, of transcending our worst instincts. We are the species that managed to look into the abyss of systematic cannibalism and say, no more, never again. And this choice, repeated generation after generation, is what makes us truly human. And so, finally, we come to the end of this journey. See you soon.